This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. I got a question for you. Is this the year that the Cleveland Browns finally win the AFC North? The reason I ask that question is because the AFC North is a little bit different than it's been the last few years. It seems a little bit more open than it has. Now, when I say a little bit, I mean a little bit. The AFC North is still one of the toughest divisions of football. It is still actually the toughest division in all of football. It is still stacked and loaded with top tier players on every team. It's not going to be an easy division to win, but this year it does feel like there are some things that are aligning that would suggest that maybe, just maybe, this might be the year that the Browns win the AFC North. Now, again, on the grand list of accomplishments we hope the Browns achieve, the AFC North Championship is relatively low. I'm pretty sure Browns fans would prefer a conference championship game or a Super Bowl. But again, winning the AFC North and reaching those other goals aren't mutually exclusive, so it doesn't make sense to really talk about them as mutually exclusive goals. So, AFC North, is it possible for the Cleveland Browns? Is it more possible than it's been in the last few years? I tend to think so. And to figure out why it is that I feel that way, we'll walk through every team in the AFC North, and I'll point out why I feel like this year may not be their best punch. And again, all four teams in the AFC North, very talented, over 500 football teams. It's the best division in all of football. Not trying to state otherwise. But what I am saying is that there's some holes that didn't exist last year for some of these teams that does exist now. We'll start with Pittsburgh. Now, I think for a while now, the Browns have been the better roster than the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, I believe since like 2018, basically the Browns and Steelers have split every year, right? The Steelers winning the game in Pittsburgh, the Browns winning the game in Cleveland. I think that's how it's been since 2018, which is 6 years. So both teams have consistently shown the ability to beat each other over the last 6 years. And this goes with the rest of the division. I'm pretty sure nobody is dominating anybody in the way that like the Browns were getting dominated in the early 2000s. So it's a pretty evenly matched division. Pittsburgh is probably the weakest roster in the division. They don't have any real hopes of a franchise quarterback. They're starting Russell Wilson, who's on his third team, and also, you know, who's a bit of a bounce back project, right? Anytime you can sign somebody for $1 million because somebody else did not want him, it's a bounce back project. To be fair to Pittsburgh, Russ did put up some decent numbers last year, and you can convince yourself that Russ is better than most other starting quarterback options. I would say starting Russ is about the same as starting Gardner Minshew, Derek Carr, Desmond Ridder. It's not that much of a difference, right? Brings me to the one question that pops up with Pittsburgh. What are they going to do with a upgrade at quarterback? And this is where I think people kind of overrate the value of a quarterback. Now, again, a top tier elite quarterback, that adds massive value to your football team, right? It doesn't necessarily guarantee success. We've seen quarterbacks have fantastic years and not so fantastic records. See Justin Herbert, see Deshaun Watson 2020 season, right? Both seasons where people made the argument at one point during the year that they should be in the MVP race. Both seasons where those teams did not make the playoffs or even come close to making the playoffs. So you can put up good numbers. it's not necessarily going to transform you into a championship caliber team. That's one way quarterback play tends to kind of get overinflated. Now, I'm not saying quarterback play is useless. I'm not saying having Joe Burrow is useless. Obviously, having somebody who's an elite quarterback is really, really good. But we do overvalue the difference of having a terrible quarterback and going to a bad quarterback. Like, there's not much of a difference there. Going from Kenny Pickett to Russell Wilson, or Kenny Pickett or Mason Rudolph to Justin Fields is closer to a lateral move than an upgrade than I think people want to admit. Are those two players? I would say Russ, is he better than Kenny Pickett? Is he better than Mason Rudolph? Yes. Is he so much better that it's going to make a significant impact? No. And there are things that come with Russell Wilson that I've mentioned plenty of times on this channel that I do think hurt your ability to be an effective team, meaning that you're not going to run the ball as much with Russell Wilson out there. You're going to give Russell Wilson control over certain aspects of the offense that might cause you to run the ball less. He could check out of run plays if he feels like it's necessary. It's just, there's a lot more that can go wrong than I think people give it credit for. And it's not a Madden swap, right? Like, I get Russ has a higher overall than Kenny Pickett, but I don't think that's going to make the difference that some people are assuming it's going to make. Outside of that, Pittsburgh has upgraded their offensive line. They've gotten better on defense. Like, overall, I think Pittsburgh has gotten better. I think that quarterback situation, it's not worse. The question is Arthur Smith going to run Najee Harris a ton, or is he going to run Jaylen Warren a ton? If they run Jaylen Warren more, they'll be a better team than they were last year. If they don't, then they're going to be the same kind of frustrating unit that they were last year. So Pittsburgh, about where they were. Their ceiling is still their ceiling. Their floor is still their floor. They're not going to go under 500. They're probably not going to win more than 11 games. They're definitely fodder for the 7 or 6 seed. Like, that's what Pittsburgh is going to be. Tail end wild card team. That's what I see them being. Their status really hasn't changed. So they're probably the least interesting team to talk about in this video. Now let's move over to a team that I find much more interesting in the conversation in this video, and that's the Cincinnati Bengals. Because on one hand, I can see why people feel like the Cincinnati Bengals are going to be a disaster this year. And I think disaster is a bit of a strong word, but they have a lot of moving parts that don't seem to be moving well together. On the other hand, in my mind, I think the Cincinnati Bengals probably are the most consistent, or the best bet to be the most consistent team this year, because they have the most consistent quarterback play. I love Lamar Jackson. I think Lamar Jackson, like, at his best is better than Joe Burrow at his best. But if I had to bet on a quarterback to show up for 10 games, I'm betting on Joe Burrow more than I'm betting on Lamar Jackson, because Joe Burrow has proven himself to be more consistent. Not to say that Joe Burrow is somebody who's a stranger to having bad games. He has had them before. I mean, especially against the Cleveland Browns. But he's more consistent than Lamar Jackson, and his postseason record and his postseason resume in general looks just a lot better than Lamar Jackson. They seem like a more credible threat, because while when people were doing this in 2019 and 2020 with Lamar, it was a bit premature about his playoff record. Now it doesn't feel premature. This conversation about Lamar's playoff record. And it seems like a conversation that needs to be had, because you go back and when you look at those playoff losses, it's not just that the Ravens have not broken through and went to a Super Bowl. It's not just that the Ravens have lost in the playoffs. Is that every game you look at that the Ravens lose in the playoffs, right underneath that is a bad performance by Lamar Jackson. You can go back every year. Or at least a underwhelming performance by Lamar Jackson. But this is not the section where I talk about the Baltimore Ravens. So that's why I tend to think of the Cincinnati Bengals a little bit higher. I don't know if they have a better record. I don't think they're a better regular season team than Baltimore. But if we're talking about teams that have the ability to break through, I do think Cincinnati has more of that potential than Baltimore at this point. And that's for other reasons that I'll get into with when I get to the Baltimore section of this video. But even with Cincinnati, even with as high as I am on Cincinnati, we have to acknowledge some things. Your quarterback is coming off a season-ending injury for the second time in 4 years. He's coming off an injury for like the third year in a row during training camp, right? This is the third time Joe Burrow's working back off of injury. And I think it's been like every year except for the 1 year they went to the Super Bowl, he's been working off something, right? Like calf injury last year, wrist injury this year, ACL injury after his rookie year. So that is something to be concerned about. How many times can Joe Burrow come into camp with something broken or wrong with him? And how many times can you expect that to just end the way you want it to? Now, they still have Jamar Chase. They will have T. Higgins this season. They did not trade him. They did not trade Trey Hendrickson. So I think they're going to be a relatively fine team. But in the absence of losing those guys, they did not add anybody to that rotation this year, right? They just kind of kept some of the guys that they had, brought back Von Bell, brought in Zach Moss to replace Joe Mixon. It's not really that different of a unit. I believe they brought in another tackle as well. Well, no, they drafted a tackle, Armarius Mims. So, yes, the Bengals are, again, a good bet to win 10 games, to be in the conversation for the AFC North. I think they're the most consistent bet. If you want to throw safe money out, the Bengals feel like safe money to me. But I do worry that they're not peaking this year. Like, they're not even close to peaking this year, and that they might have already peaked in their reload era, right, where they're building towards a second window in a year or two with Joe Burrow. This just doesn't feel like the year that the Bengals are going all out. Same thing with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Doesn't seem like a year where they're going all out either. Cincinnati Bengals don't seem like they're going all out. Now let's look at Baltimore. And that's a team that screams to me they're not going all out. Because what was available this offseason, I mean, what's been available for the last 3 offseasons that the Baltimore Ravens have refused to acknowledge? Wide receivers. The Baltimore Ravens, for yet another offseason, have not added much talent at the wide receiver position. This always is a problem that Raven fans downplay and yell at me and get mad at me about for bringing up on AFC North Talk during June. But then during October, November, December, they're furious that they don't have more wide receivers. It's been a problem. It's still a problem. It's a worse problem than it was last year, right? Because at least you had Odell Beckham to throw in there. Like, you don't have Odell Beckham anymore. You're betting a lot on a very disappointing player in Rashad Bateman. You do have Zay Flowers, who is a nice wide receiver, but at 5'9", he's not good enough at that height to be a number 1 receiver. Mark Andrews was pretty inconsistent last year. Like, some games he looked like good old Mark. Other games he just looked like nothing. Like, he played a whole game versus the Browns where I didn't even know he was out there for the bulk of it, which is very unlike Mark Andrews. Don't know what's going on with him. And then you have to address the Lamar Jackson element of this, where Lamar Jackson is inconsistent. Now, he's not as inconsistent as a Trevor Lawrence, but he is inconsistent. Like, I think that part of it has to be acknowledged. Lamar Jackson has been inconsistent, especially in the playoffs. And some people will argue he hasn't been inconsistent in the playoffs. He's just been bad. I won't go that far. I think he's just been inconsistent. So you have that element to worry about. And if you're Baltimore, you lost a couple of pieces on that defense. This just doesn't feel like you're replacing 3 of your starting offensive linemen from last year. Where does this feel like a team that's going all out to win the Super Bowl this year? It doesn't feel like it to me. You look at the Cleveland Browns, They're the team in the North that's been the most aggressive to add players. They're the team in the North that feels like, hey, we're trying to win a championship right now. And I think that's why this feels like the Cleveland Browns' best opportunity in the last 5 years since the Stefanski era has started to actually win the division, because they seem like the only team in the AFC North that is trying to maximize everything that they can get out of this season. Doesn't guarantee anything, but it does mean that you're in, it's like being in pole position, right? Like you are in a good spot to win this race as long as you run your race. And that's the question to the Cleveland Browns. Will they run their race? But that's my whole thing. That's why I think the Browns have a great chance to win the AFC North. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.